Welcome back to the Gardening with Joy and Holly radio show. Happy you've taken time to join us today on the program. Holly, let's go to the hotline and bring in our guest for this week.
Tamar Haspel is a columnist, author, and speaker. She writes the James Beard Award-winning Washington Post column Unearthed, which looks at how our diet affects us and our planet. Her book is entitled To Boldly Grow. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we thank you for taking time out of your day and not only to educate Holly and myself, but all of our listeners. And I'll start with this. Where did your passion for connection of food come from? Was it something that happened early on, or you found it later on in life, and how'd that work?
Well, like most of us, I eat. Right. And I think that it wasn't so much that I had a passion for where food comes from, but I was just interested in it. And, even when my husband and I lived in Manhattan, we grew tomatoes on the rooftop. And then when we moved essentially by accident to Cape Cod, we started looking around and saying, hey, what can we do here that we couldn't do in other places? And the answer was all kinds of stuff. And once you sort of start doing things, and for most people, and for me, it starts with a garden, and you stand in the garden and you eat that first little super sweet tomato. You know that feeling, don't you?
Yep.
Where and you get that smell, and it's warm, and you realize that the food that you're invested in this way is different from other food. And so for us, for my husband and me, after we did the gardening, it just sort of took on a life of its own.
Now, when you grew the tomatoes on the roof, was that something that other people were doing, or did you have to ask permission? Because a lot of people are like, well, I can't garden where I'm at unless you're creative.
Yeah, well, we had to ask permission, and I was actually really surprised when I asked the building manager, hey, is it okay if we put some whiskey barrels with tomato plants on the roof? And she said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And then after we had established it, we had a few of these barrels up there. We had some tomatoes, we had some herbs, we had some raspberries, we had some cucumbers. And, it was this great little garden. And I said to my husband, Kevin, I said, honey, what happens if everybody wants to do this? There's not enough room for everyone to do it. And he said, honey, people in this building don't even cook their own food, let alone grow their own food. So it wasn't catching on like wildfire. But if you do live in a city, it's possible you can use your roof. But there's also a couple of decent indoor options. I think mushrooms are a terrific thing to grow in the city. You get one of those kits and you can grow oyster mushrooms. You can get those hydroponic herb gardens that go on a windowsill. And if you can get out of the city, there are places to go. There's foraging most of the year in a lot of places, and you get a little exercise to boot.
Also, community gardens in these big cities are an option as well, I believe.
Absolutely. I've heard some stories about that. It's hard to get a plot in some of those at this point because they're very popular. But it's fabulous, and there are places where it's going to be tough to try and do any sort of food procurement on your own. But you can always make something work.
Definitely. So speaking of that, if someone does want to become more connected with where their food comes from, but maybe they really don't have access to garden space, they live in a food desert, and maybe they don't have good transportation to get to a natural area to forage, etc., how can they begin a better connection with where their food comes from?
Well, I think we've already run down the city options, and there are also farmers markets in a lot of cities, and even though you don't get the food, you're not procuring it firsthand, which is what we were doing. You meet the people who do raise it and grow it, and there's something to be said for that too. For me, there's something about getting dirty. There's something about doing it yourself. But if that's not an option, definitely go to the farmer's market.
Well, you spoke about farmers markets. The price of groceries are continuing to go up. For fill in the blank, you want to put your reason here. It is important to find a better source and connection of food like farmers markets, gardening, foraging. And we're in a world, and I say this as, if you want to do it and you want to do it bad enough, you can make it happen.
Yeah, that's true. It's absolutely true. And if you're a good gardener, then, and you have, decent conditions and you can grow things successfully, then I think it actually can save you money and supplement your budget, supplement your food outside of your budget, and it's true of things certainly like herbs, which are relatively easy to grow and which you usually have to buy too much of at the grocery store anyway. But there are a lot of things, and I think, going into trying to get your own food, if it's a budget thing, you have to go in with relatively low expectations, because you have to factor in that not all of your projects are going to work out.
Right.
And sometimes, the bugs will eat your collard greens and you'll see nary a one. And so there are certain things that you can grow. I have a bed of arugula that I put in the early spring. I have sugar snap peas, and all of that you grow from seed, so it's very inexpensive to grow. And those are going to be financial wins. Shiitake mushrooms can be a huge financial win because they're so expensive in the grocery store. So definitely think about what things cost when you plant them. And go for some of the things that are splurges in the grocery store. And if you can grow them successfully, it's definitely a big win.
And Holly and I are not doctors, and we don't play them on TV, but it's common sense. What you eat directly relates to how you sleep and how active you are and how you feel. And the better you eat, the better you're going to be in all of those.
Well, I'm certainly in favor of eating well for all kinds of reasons, and it's certainly true that eating a wholesome, nutritious diet can change the way you feel.
So your book, To Boldly Grow, it's a little bit entertaining, but also educational. Can you tell our listeners about your book and what they can expect when they pick up a copy?
So To Boldly Grow is about a project that started off being about food, which is, of course, why we're all talking together. And, when we left New York City and we went to Cape Cod, we started this project where we would try and eat one food a day that we got with our own two hands. And it started with gardening, and then, we turned to chickens, and then we did fishing, and we started foraging, and we ended up hunting, and it sort of snowballed. But along the way, I figured out that the reason the project was compelling to me really didn't have very much to do with food. It was because I was trying one thing after another that I'd never done before. And the first time you do anything, that's where the learning curve is the steepest. And so Kevin and I were spending all of this time on that steep part of the learning curve. And each time you do it, you figure out that you can do something that you hadn't done before. And sometimes some of those things were hard. If you told me that, I was going to be able to shoot field dress and break down a deer, I would have told you were out of your mind. But once you come out the other end, you feel competent, you feel confident, and doing things that you've never done before. It's sort of the secret to successful self-improvement, which is why I think it really took hold of me. And the book is the story of that.
I see. So, and you chose to, some people choose not to, but you chose to hunt in order to get the more, what would you say, you knew where the food was coming from type of mindset rather than purchasing meat at the grocery store? Is that how you decided to do that?
I think that if you're going to be a meat eater, eating an overpopulated animal like a white-tailed deer that is doing damage in the ecosystem is the single most responsible way to eat meat. And I eat meat. I eat other kinds of meat as well. And it was sort of the natural culmination of everything that we had done. But yeah, I feel very good about having a freezer full of venison.
Yeah, people call that prepping now, but our grandparents called that living. You know,
That's right. And we don't do it for ideological reasons. We're not trying to be self-sufficient. We believe in interdependence, but we do it because it's interesting and it's compelling to us.
Right. I feel like on some level that the food system has failed a lot of people, especially those who may be considered lower income people. And do you agree with that? And if so, how can we change that in our society?
I mean, the answer to the first question is easy. It's yes, I do think that the food system is deeply, deeply problematic, especially for people who are most vulnerable. But what we do about it is very difficult to know. And, these are some of the things I write about, that, our food system has become something that people can't navigate successfully. But there is something good about it. This is what happens when we have overabundance, which of course we've had for a very long time now. And for all of its problems, overabundance is way better than scarcity. But it does create a landscape of foods that are specifically designed to appeal to you, to be overeaten without regard for how nutritious they are. And it has made it very, very difficult for people to eat the kind of diet they intend to eat because they face temptation at every turn. Now, what we do about it is very, very difficult because this is sort of a result of how we operate in the United States, and some people blame capitalism, although there are non-capitalist countries that also have obesity and disease problems as a result of diet. And I don't think there are any easy answers, but I think we've gotten to a place where at least we appreciate what the problems are, and that's the first step.
I think there was a famous person that said the easy part of the problem is identifying the problem. The hard part is solving the easy part of the problem.
That would be exactly correct.
Well, we really enjoyed having you on the program. How can people find out more about you, your information, and pick up your book?
You can Google me. I'm easy to find. I'm the only Tamar Haspel on the planet, and you can find me at tamarhaspel.com. You can find me in the pages of the Washington Post, and you can find my book both online and in a lot of bookstores.
Well, Tamar, we greatly appreciate the time you've offered and the education you provided Holly, myself, and all of our listeners. We thank you very much for that.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.